My name is Scott Lokers. I'm the Transition Ministry Catalyst for Luminex. And we're in part two about dealing with our own anxiety, learning to grow in that skill of being less anxious. And if we think about leadership, the challenge of leadership, and often we become anxious somewhere in the process of leading. And some typical responses. We took a look at that last time in the Whiteboard Wednesday. If you didn't see it and you want to go back and find that, that'd be great. But some typical responses. We either move toward people or away from them. We might overfunction or underfunction, or triangle. We might talk about people instead of to people. But today I want us to think about, how do we deal with our anxiety? How do we learn to grow in that skill, not just of acting less anxious, but being less anxious? Some possibilities, some opportunities to grow. One would be, as I'm getting anxious, if I think about slowing things down. When I become anxious, I can sense it in my body. I get stiff and everything becomes tight, and it's a signal to me. And one of the things I can do is just slow things down, take some deep breaths, and just start to think a little more creatively. I think about Jesus in the Gospels, and you remember when the woman caught in adultery is brought to him, and as part of that scenario, Jesus bends down, he starts to write in the ground, and we often wonder, what did he write? But I wonder, is Jesus simply slowing things down? It's a highly anxious situation. Is he just giving people, and maybe even himself, a chance to just think, to take some deep breaths? It can be helpful. I have a good friend who was leading a meeting, and she's a really good leader, but it was a tense situation. And she said, we're just going to take a time out right here. We're just going to stop, and we're going to take a break of 10 or 15 minutes. She tells a story about walking out of the room, and it was so hot in that room. Didn't realize it until they walked out. But just a chance to slow things down and to gain some bearings. So that's one way to deal with it. Number two, to listen to understand. If we're in a conversation and if I'm anxious, I'm not doing a good job typically of listening to you. I'm thinking about how I want to respond, how I'm right, how you're wrong. So sometimes as I'm getting anxious, I just remind myself under my breath, I just think, listen to understand. Listen to understand. Maybe God has something for me in this conversation. I need to listen before I respond. A third way is to see the good in the other person or in the other people in this situation. Same idea. If I'm anxious, I'm more concerned about defending my turf or proving that I'm right. And I'll often paint other people as they're wrong or they're bad people. And I have to remind myself, see the good. Seldom is it true, I'm exactly right, they're all wrong. Listen to understand and see the good. And then the last one would be to get some coaching. So if you start to see some patterns in your life, you start to see yourself getting anxious, you can think about that, think that through outside of the situation. Hopefully you have a good coach that you trust, and you can even practice some scenarios. Instead of showing up the way I usually do, I want to show up differently. Another good friend, good leader, was walking into a meeting. He knew it was going to be an anxious situation, and he had decided ahead of time, I know I'm going to get criticized. I know this is going to be challenging. I'm going to slow things down. I'm going to listen to understand. I'm going to respond as thoughtfully as I can. And he operated differently as a leader. So I invite you to think about and practice ways of lowering your anxiety as a leader. Thanks.